service. So it's nice to think back. And I had a lot of stuff. I was over in Korea for a year, and I loved it. I loved Korea. It wasn't during the war. It was after the war. I hadn't been in the war. And I was not in Vietnam, which was at war. So it was good timing not to be in Vietnam and to be somewhere else overseas. But anyway, I got a lot of stuff. Pictures and...
I bet Korea was beautiful. I've never been, but...
It's a gorgeous, gorgeous country. I wish my pictures were better, but especially out in the countryside, the kids, and the city, and the structures, the history, the culture, the food. Anyway, it was a joy. Do you have questions, or?
Yes. We'll be asking you questions, and please respond to the best of your ability.
Absolutely.
All right. So this is an oral report for Civics and Government at Nauset Regional High School. It's for the Witness to War Serving a Nation project. Please state your name and your town of residence.
Richard Curtis, Brewster, Mass.
All right.
Where and when were you born?
I was born in New Jersey. Town was New Brunswick, New Jersey, on March 28, 1945. Before you folks.
Yeah, definitely.
Before your parents.
How did you end up on Cape Cod?
We were living in Denver, Colorado, and my sister lives in Brewster, and her husband and family, and we would come and visit. And it was so nice after I retired from government service, we moved here. So that was 14 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So you said that you have a sister. Did you have any other siblings, and were they in the military?
Yes, I have a brother, younger brother. My sister is 2 years older. My brother's 4 years younger, and he was not in the service. Neither was my sister. In fact, no one else in my family. My father was not during World War II. He was of that age, but he was an engineer and he was employed.
So how did you get interested in the military then?
I wasn't. I was not interested.
Okay.
This is during Vietnam War. And there was a draft. There's still a draft. People have to sign with the Selective Service when they reach 18. But when I was signing up in 1960, well, whenever it was, 18 years from 45, we were subject to the draft, which meant they would send you a letter and say, report for a pre-induction physical. If you pass the physical, you're in the Army. So I wasn't interested. I was in graduate school. I got a letter from my local draft board, and I was supposed to report, and I did, and I passed the physical. And at that time, most of the folks being drafted were being sent to Vietnam as riflemen, and that was a war that was very unpopular, very much rejected and disputed by college kids, of which I was one. And I had a couple of classmates in college who were killed in Vietnam, and it was a real threat. And we had, bless you, we had, we were Americans. We were supporting our country. We don't just go to Canada or someplace, but we also didn't want to serve in Vietnam. So long story, and I apologize, I took a test with the Army about language and did well. And so I enlisted with the promise that I would get language school. So I got drafted, basic training, went out to Monterey, California, which is a beautiful area, at the language school, and for 6 months learned Portuguese. So that's got my military career started, but I was not interested in the military.
What were your early views on the military?
Again, it was necessary. We're Americans. They do protect and support us. This was a very unpopular war, very unpopular. We got in, presumably the domino theory was the prevailing theory, that if the communists took Cambodia, then they would go get Vietnam, and they would get Thailand, and then maybe the Philippines. And so we were in Vietnam after the French had left. They had been defeated in Vietnam. We were in there trying to maintain a democratic government. And it was very, very unpopular war. So on the military, I mean, I knew it was part of America. I knew I was subject to the draft. It was something that you needed to deal with. And so we talked a lot in college. What do we want to do about if we get drafted and go to Vietnam? Do we go to Canada? Do we have an injury. Donald Trump had a couple of deferments because of his heel or something. So people were looking for ways, or do they go to Vietnam? And some did, and some died at 20, 21, 22.
How old were you when you first got drafted?
Let's see, I finally found my, 69. I served in 69. I got drafted like 6 months before then. So 45, 55, 65. I was 24 when I went in the military, but it was about I took the test maybe 6 months, 8 months before, and they let me finish graduate school, and then I enlisted for the 4 years. You would have been drafted for 2 years, served 2 years, but if you enlist, it was 4 years. So I decided, well, if I get drafted, I go to Vietnam and I'm shooting and getting shot at. And if I enlist, it's 4 years, but maybe not Vietnam.
So where were you first stationed in the war?
You start out in basic training. So it was 8 weeks or something like that in Fort Dix, New Jersey. And then my assignment was Monterey, California, the language school. Wonderful, wonderful. California was a delight.
I bet it's beautiful.
Oh, beautiful. Then ended up down in Fort Hood, Texas, and there were a company of us, several hundred linguists, people who spoke Farsi and Spanish and German and Portuguese and Italian and Russian. And we were really wasted down there. And we were just wash trucks, and we were part of the 2nd Armored Division, which was, we had these large electronic trucks, electronic equipment on trucks, and we would go park, and we were supposed to intercept voice communications, and as linguists we could interpret them if they were Portuguese or Russian or German or whatever. That was the idea, but it was a waste of time. So I got out of that branch of the military and went to Fort Holabird, Maryland for counterintelligence, so I could do something else. And it was from there that I went to Korea for 13 months. So that was my little Fort Dix, Monterey, California, Fort Hood, Texas, Fort Holabird in Maryland, and then Korea for 13 months. And then the whole Vietnam War, this was 72 when I got out, the whole Vietnam War was winding down. They were getting people out of the military, we were trying to get out of Vietnam, so I got out in 3 years instead of 4. Luck of the draw.
What were some of your best experiences while in the military?
Monterey I loved. It was like going to college. 6 hours a day, we went to class, and we spoke nothing but the language. And I enjoyed it. It was great fun. It was a delight. Korea was the other highlight. Beautiful, beautiful country. When you get away from the army bases are surrounded by, at least overseas in Korea at this time, by bars and kind of low-end places. Get away from the army bases, and we took a trip. 6 of us took a four-day trip by Army Jeep. I don't know if it was legal. I'm sure it was. We drove up from where we were. I have a map of Korea, and then up across the DMZ, and then over to the East Coast, and then down to, not all the way to Busan, and then back home. And we slept out in sleeping bags those 3 nights, and it was so much fun to have kids come up to the sleeping area, or adults, and they wanted to shake your hand because some of these folks remember, this was 1970, 1950, 60 to 63, 50 to 53 was the Vietnam War, and they remembered it. They remembered the Americans coming over there and saving them, and they were so happy. We couldn't speak Korean, they couldn't speak English, but they were so happy just to see Americans, because it was an area, most of the Americans were on the west side of Korea and up near the demilitarized zone, not on the long beaches on the right-hand, on the east side. So Korea was great, Monterey was great. Couldn't beat them.
What exactly were you doing in Korea? Like, why were you stationed there?
It was an interesting assignment. Fort Holabird was counterintelligence, so they were training us to kind of look out for threats to our security. Documents threats, if someone were to be giving documents over to the wrong side. Physical security, the area, do we have enough physical security? And personnel security, where people did things that may have thrown their security clearances into jeopardy. So I went over to Korea, and I was the counterintelligence agent assigned to the Army Security Agency in Angjongni. And that was a big electronics communications, just huge computers and machines. And this was 70, long before the good computers now, but intercepting communications, Morse code, voice communications, and trying to interpret what was going on so we could hear the Russians or the North Koreans, Chinese. And my job was to investigate or to talk with and to find out, so I was a bit of an interviewer too, to find out, you know, who was doing what, was there any problem in terms of a security problem or a loss of our documents, or where somebody was maybe getting himself involved in a situation where he could, and they were all guys, where he could be blackmailed, do something in the village and have pictures taken, and just a real problem situation. So 13 months I wrote reports, I investigated, I talked to people. It was a great job. And actually, because of that experience, and because somehow, I mean, who knows, I didn't plot it this way.
Yeah.
But because of that, I then, when I came back, I interviewed for a federal position as an investigator, having had this kind of experience in the military. I got accepted, and that was my first job with the federal government in Denver. It was a great, I mean, it was, I didn't want to be in the military. All my friends were in graduate school, getting jobs, getting married, starting families in those 3 years, and I was in Korea, and everything was kind of delayed. And yet it got me a job, it got me out to Denver, which I absolutely loved.
You sound pretty thankful for your experience in the military. Were there any downsides to it? Besides missing out on...
Not really. Not everything was perfect. In Camp Humphreys, Korea, while we were over there, it was 1971, 72. This was a period where there were some riots and in American cities, Washington D.C., Chicago, maybe San Francisco, and the black soldiers, for the most part, didn't want to be out there, and we had a race riot on Camp Humphreys, and everything closed down, and a very difficult time. In basic training, I was training with a guy, partners on the rifle range, and he dropped his gun in the sand, and you can't drop your gun. And he got sick and he died that night. And it was like, I was a kid. Guy I'm with all day and he dies. There were occasional things. There were things down in Texas at Fort Hood that were not pleasant. The town was dry. Soldiers like to drink beer. They drive away from town to another town, come back, get in an auto accident, and get killed. I mean, it was like, there were downsides, but nothing. No, overall it was a great experience, and I wouldn't have traded it for anything.
We're sorry for your loss. But do you think being in the military had like a positive aspect over your life? Was it?
I think so. I'm proud of the service I did. I did a service. I avoided Vietnam, and you always, afterwards, you say, why was I spared? Why was I not in Vietnam when friends of mine were? And I played lacrosse with a guy who died in Vietnam. He was killed by enemy fire, and why him? And why not me? I mean, so there's that. I don't know. It's hard to talk about. It's
all right.
It's just. I loved the experience. I was glad where I was. I was glad I wasn't in Vietnam, but I have concern for the poor folks who were there.
Well, moving on to a less sad topic, what job did you take after the military?
I worked for an agency of the federal government called the Civil Service Commission. It's now called the Office of Personnel Management. But they go out and do interviews of people and gather records of folks who were trying to get a security clearance. So it was kind of similar. We went out. We were in Denver. We had the 6-state region: the Dakotas, Montana, Utah, Wyoming, Colorado. that 6? Montana 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. And we would go out for 2 weeks, and for some reason I seem to get North Dakota a lot. Not as much Utah, Wyoming. And we would have an individual who was applied for a federal job, like with the Department of Energy. It was called the Atomic Energy Commission, and now it's Department of Energy. And they needed to have a background check. Had they ever been arrested? Did they abuse alcohol, drugs? Did they have financial problems? Were all their employment periods verifiable from employment records? Do people remember them? Do they recommend them? Do they know them? So that's what a background check is. Find out about somebody and give that information. We didn't make decisions, we just gathered the information. Give that information to others who then look at it all and say, this person warrants a security clearance.
Was that an interesting job for you?
Ah, loved it. I mean, I love Denver, and I grew to like North Dakota, Wyoming, South Dakota, Colorado. I drove around a lot. Had great experiences. There was a tunnel, the Eisenhower Tunnel, being built on I-70 through the Colorado mountains, about 2-mile, 3-mile tunnel. I won't go into that, but anyway, I got a chance to walk in one of the bores while it was being worked on, because the guy had been a miner, and his friend was a miner, and I had walked through the tunnel with a dripping ceiling and dirt and water and light bulbs strung every 100 feet. And I walked in, and I found my guy, and I talked to him, got the information, and walked back out. So, I mean, you can't beat that. Plus, the people were so nice in North and South Dakota, Wyoming, in the small towns. They would welcome you and say, yeah, let me help, and come on and have a cup of coffee. Not always the same case in Boulder or Colorado, where a university is, or Denver, where the people were more sophisticated. What's the government trying to get information about him? So it was different, but it was, wonderful experience. I talk a lot. I apologize.
Don't worry. It's great. You're supposed to talk a lot.
Yeah.
This is an interview about you.
Yeah, we want to hear everything.
Is there anything you'd like to say to current soldiers?
It's a whole different world with them. They're volunteers. It's not the same. I think what I would say, no matter how bad it may seem, they kind of know what they're getting in for. But so it's not like I can tell them anything. It gets better, and all of that experience is good. It's all positive. There was a story on the news last night about some school districts which were looking for teachers because they were short teachers, and they were hiring veterans who were used to kind of chain of command and information and sharing, and they were employing veterans as teachers. So I think I'm off the subject, but I think the question was, what would I suggest? I think it gets good. It's all good experience. It may not seem good at the time, and it didn't to me when I was in Fort Hood, Texas. I thought, I'm never going to get out of here. This is crazy. But it was great.
How do you feel about the fact that a lot of veterans, when it's coming home from the war, can't get proper health care?
Oh, horrible, 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 horrible. We just don't want to pay for it, do we? We want to send people to war, and then they come back from war, and they get, especially with the IEDs. I mean, we didn't have any of that in Korea. In the Korean War or Vietnam War, people were shooting at each other, but they didn't have these hidden bombs in the trails and so on. Well, some booby traps, but terrible mental problems coming back from that kind of fighting, where you're not sure who is the enemy. Is that kid carrying a bomb? Do you shoot a kid? Do you shoot a woman because she's acting suspiciously? It's just the mental and the physical issues. It's horrible that we got into a lot of that. It's horrible that we're not treating them as they need to be treated and given the money. We just don't want to pay for it. And we're going to be paying for these folks for years and years and years. So many are committing suicide. So many of these young folks, men and women. It's horrible that when we get into something like that, we don't commit to seeing it through all the way to the end, which may be 50 years, when some of these people are 70 years old, the way I am.
Did you feel well received when you came back from war?
I'm sorry, I'm an old man.
Okay. I'll speak louder, don't worry. Did you feel well received when you came back from war? Or was it
Yeah,
also a negative experience?
it was not negative for me. It was negative for some people coming back from Vietnam when they got off the planes and in uniform, and people looked down at them and insulted them because they represented the war, even though they didn't want to be there, perhaps. But they represented the war in the military that the folks disagreed with so much. And so, no, I came back, changed my clothes. Actually, I didn't have to change clothes because when I went to Korea, this was the most interesting story I have in my military.
Go ahead.
You'll be sorry. I was a sergeant, and yet I was going to have to be interviewing over in Korea colonels and majors and captains and lieutenants and higher ranked people. The enlisted people are the private corporals, sergeants, master sergeants. The officers are the lieutenants, captains, majors, colonels, generals. And I was going to have to be interviewing people, and as a sergeant interviewing a colonel, it was like it wouldn't work. I mean, they would get out of here. So they gave me an identification and a passport as a civilian. So I'm a sergeant in the Army, and I flew to Seattle, and I took my military uniform off, put it in the bag, got out my civilian clothes and my passport, and I flew over to Korea as a civilian. And I was a civilian. I wore civilian clothes the whole time I was over there, and then came back. So when I came back, I was in civilian clothes, so it wasn't the same. But that's my kind of undercover story, my secret agent story. It wasn't, but it was fun.
So what is your overall feelings about the war after you've served?
Life after? It helped. It helped me because when I was employed by the government, there were tests you took, but if you had a certain passing score, if you were a veteran, you got 5 additional points. So that helped me get my first job, having 5 additional points. I mean, I look back and I think I was very fortunate. I loved learning Korean, loved learning Portuguese. Never got a chance to use it, but except when we came here to Brewster, Giselle Lagotier was leading the English as a second language, teaching non-English speakers English over in Hyannis, and most of them were Portuguese or Brazilian who speak Portuguese. And so I got involved in that for a couple of years, and it was so much fun to go over to Hyannis and try and teach these people who were coming to class at 7 at night after working a job or 2 jobs, hungry and tired. They came and they'd stay for 2 hours to learn English to be better. I was very impressive people. I still get emotional because those young folks that's what America's all about. Anyway, so I'm not sure I know your question, but after it's been great. It's been great. I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I had the experiences I had. I'm glad I avoided the experiences I was able to avoid. But I think it was very, very valuable for me.
Did you go back and visit any of the places where you'd been stationed?
Not the places. I have kept in touch with some of the guys I worked with. Mostly from Korea, because we were very close for a long time. Of course, in a situation like that, there are people always coming in, and you serve your 13 months and people leaving. So, I mean, it was always a kind of turnover. But there were some people I served with for 10 or 12 months. So I keep in touch with the people. But Fort Hood, Texas, I don't enjoy Texas. I haven't got back to Monterey, but and I don't know if Fort Holabird is still there. It may have been decommissioned, but the people, not the places. And I haven't been back to Korea. That would be interesting, except it was so different. What, 70, 80, 35 years ago. So much bigger, so much more robust. I mean, some of these pictures in here are, I mean, I was just fascinated by the towns and the I don't know, the agriculture, to be there and to watch. I got there, I'm trying to remember, anyway, there for a whole year, so I saw a whole planting season of the rice, where the women were out there in the mud, the water paddies, planting the rice, and then it would be growing all year, and then in the next year they would cut it off and harvest it and replow, and kids were, you can't beat the kids. That's when I had hair. But you're always running upon people. A couple of our guys, one guy married a Korean lady. Here I am as a civilian. About kimchi, the food and the baseball. But this is one of the trips where six of us. Robin Worth, there was a football player at the University of Richmond, and he and I and several others. Oh yeah, before we took the big Jeep trip, the 3-day trip, we a bunch of us decided, let's learn how do we find Sorak Mountain, and then in Korean, and we'd go take public buses. So or Sungnisan Mountain. So Sungnisan Odie Sumnida was, how do I get to Sungnisan Mountain? So anyway, it was a joy.
Did you learn much Korean when you were there, or just a few phrases?
A couple of words, yeah, phrases, words. We didn't, but the architecture, yeah. I apologize. You guys have to just say,
no.
cut it.
No, it's really interesting for us. It's just such a good
This is
perspective
your
to
interview.
have.
We want you to talk.
Yeah.
I guess I finally found this morning. I started in March of '69 and I got out in April of '72. So instead of 4 years, it was just a little over 3. But I had a camera. I had use of a camera, and so we had a guy who was a cartoonist. So I took a lot of pictures and just grabbed stuff, and so there I am in my office. We didn't have computers in, typewriters. So in the back, I'm sure, I'd sent my family letters, but I would make carbon copies and send them to everybody. Hey, Liz.
Hey.
So,
All right. So I think if we don't have any more questions,
I think we're good.
then we're just going to take some pictures of what you
Sure.
brought.
sure.
And thank you so much for coming to interview me.
This is the last time you'll ask to talk to me.
Definitely
You
not.
folks are probably
You
gone
had a very
home.
interesting story.
Now you're going
No,
to have to
it's
walk
very
home.
interesting.
No, your ride's still there.
Army Security, 2nd Armored Division, Specialist, even dog tags. I hang on to my dog tags. 2nd Armored Division was called Hell on Wheels.
That does not sound fun.
Thank you very much.
You're
for
welcome.
Yeah,
interviewing
thank
You're
you
gonna
so
take
much
some
for
me.
your
pictures.
service.
And we promise you it was very interesting.
It was. Don't be scared.
Hey, I was an investigator too, I know that. I even got an award. But impressive, huh?
Very.
Not really.
It's
Military merit, something in kind of meritorious service award. Okay, you're gonna take some pictures.
All right.
Thank you
Thank
very
you so
much.
much for your time. It was
You're welcome.
really, really, really interesting.
If you have time, if you want to take this is a map of the, a map, a flag, you don't have to take it. It's the Korean flag. And there's some interesting information about what the bars stand for, the yang and the But I've got a lot of stuff. If you want any of it, you're welcome to it. Map of Korea, but let's take the pictures.
All right.
Thank you.
You can think.
Thank you so much. It was
Well,
really, really, really interesting.
You're